Secret interrogation center in East Timor. During the widely celebrated peacemaking mission in East Timor, Australian soldiers held 14 men and boys in a secret interrogation facility. The detainees, suspected of being pro-Indonesian militia, say they were stripped, assaulted, deprived of food, water and sleep, and forcibly shown the mangled bodies of 2 militiamen. Their ordeal led to Australian military investigators recommending charges of torture. These are the men and boys who were interrogated. The Australian SAS thought they were all high-value targets. They were wrong. Among them were 3 boys, farmers and a man with a disability. Four Corners has tracked down 11 of the 14 detainees, and for the first time, they are publicly telling their stories. The Timorese say they were tortured and are still traumatized by what the Australians did to them. Their treatment shocked many of the soldiers who witnessed it and led to a secret investigation by one of Australia's closest allies. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. In October 1999, pro-Indonesian militia gangs were terrorizing and Timorese across the newly liberated nation now known as Timor-Leste. The Australian-led International Force for East Timor was deployed on a peacemaking mission to put a stop to the violence. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 12 seconds 12s liberation _vids. In the southwest town of Swai near the Indonesian border, Australian, NZ and British Special Forces had set up a roadblock to flush out remaining militia. When a truck tried to run the roadblock, Australian SAS soldiers opened fire, wounding 4 Timorese. Those 4, along with another 10 men the Special Forces soldiers suspected of being militia, were taken to the capital, Dili, for questioning. In Dili, the men were then wrongly blamed for an ambush near Swai that had left 2 Australian SAS soldiers wounded. The 14 were not involved. They had been rounded up hours before the ambush. It wasn't supposed to exist. On arrival in Dili, the men were blindfolded and handcuffed as they were led off Black Hawk helicopters by Australian soldiers. The 4 wounded were taken to hospital. The other 10 should have been taken to an official detention facility in the heart of East Timor's capital. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 12 seconds 12s camcorder _vids. Instead, they were led to a secret, Australian-run interrogation centre at Dili's heliport, where the Australian SAS soldiers were stationed. It was all hush-hush, top-secret sort of stuff, a military police captain would later tell investigators. It wasn't supposed to exist. Taken into a hot, small military tent, the men were terrified. Some later soiled themselves in fear. The men had mugshots taken against a grimy height chart. Over 72 hours, they were subjected to repeated interrogations by Australian intelligence officers who tried to get confessions about militia membership and activities. In between interrogations, the men were kept blindfolded and were forced to sit cross-legged with their hands tied in a military tent in the sweltering heat. These men were all quite small and they were scared. "They were scared of us," said Intelligence Sergeant Michael Clay, who was tasked with guarding the detainees for the first few hours at the heliport. Intelligence Sergeant Michael Clay pictured in East Timor in 1999. Former Intelligence Sergeant Michael Clay decided to speak out about what he saw in East Timor. The bodies of 2 militiamen in the Swai ambush were also brought there by Interfit soldiers and shown to the detainees. It's a bit hard to put that whole combination of the smell of blood, the corpses starting to turn, fear, anger, heat, 30 degrees, 90% humidity, very little ventilation, into words, said Intelligence Officer Matthew Coombs, who observed some of the initial tactical questioning of the detainees. "They tortured us." One of the detainees was Farmer Valdemar Deneri, who suffered from severe hearing and speech impairments. Four Corners spoke to him through his neighbor, who interpreted for him. They arrested him and some of them didn't know about his disability, so they hit him, his neighbor said. Australian military police officer Carl Fellauer, who would later interview Mr. Deneri as part of a special inquiry, said, "They went to town on him. Because he couldn't hear what they were saying, they thought he was highly trained or something. And it took them quite a while to work out that that was an issue, which is rather embarrassing when you look back on it," Mr. Fellauer said. When he was eventually released to the official detention center, a military police officer, who collected him from the heliport, wrote in his diary about Mr. Deneri's condition. "Pissed his pants. Obvious that he had been ed over by SAS, who had captured, detained him, and by INT, who had interrogated him. The man was scared." Detainee Julio da Silva was only 16 years old when he was taken to the heliport. "They tortured us," he told Four Corners. "They hit me, punched me here, and I fell backwards," Mr. da Silva said. "Then my back was sore. I had cramps. If I bent forward, they would use a weapon to hit me in the back, kick me in the back, then I fell forward. They sat me up again." Mr. da Silva said they were deprived of food and were only given sips of water from the lid of a bottle, despite the sweltering heat in the tent. One of the most disturbing experiences for the detainees was when the Australian soldiers forced them to look at the mangled bodies of militia in an effort to identify them. "I was really scared because I was still young. I cried a lot," Mr. da Silva said. "I thought I was going to die." Mr. Clay said this was done to identify the bodies before the interrogations began. "The only way we could identify those men was to bring the detainees, one at a time in a very controlled environment, and ask them, 'Do you know this man?' Did I see reactions from detainees? Yeah. There was a lot of screaming." Another detainee, Celestino de Andrade, told Four Corners he too was terrified when shown the bodies. "My feeling was maybe I will also die like this, maybe they are showing me this because they want to me." During the interrogations, the Interfit soldiers repeatedly asked the detainees if they were members of the militia. "I didn't understand the word militia. I thought they were saying Malaysia," Farmer Florindo Moniz Cardoso said. "They repeatedly questioned me about that and they kicked me in the back." Another detainee, Jaco Buzmau, said when he was arrested he was stripped down to his underwear and left that way for the duration of his detention. He recalls Interfit soldiers beating two detainees when they tried to resist being put in the tent. "They were beaten and pushed under the tarpaulin, like pigs in a pen," he said. One detainee was singled out for special treatment. The Australian suspected Bartolomeus Ulu was a member of Kopassus, the Indonesian Special Forces. "So they treated me in a way that wasn't normal, like an animal," he told Four Corners. "So when I was hit, I was really properly hit. At that time, I truly was tortured. I was kicked to the point of losing consciousness." Even now he insists he was a civilian, but he says he was forced to confess to being Kopassus while being interrogated. "I had to sit for 24 hours, then stand up for 24 hours, my eyes were covered, my hands were tied, a civilian prisoner." He said he was sexually assaulted. "At that time, I was bare-chested. They told me to take my pants off, my underwear, everything off. Then they groped my genitals. It wasn't a male Interfit soldier, it was a female. I don't know what sort of check that was. Then they kept taking my statement." The questions continued. That was abuse. The Australians themselves later described the detainees' fear. One of the actual particular prisoners I interrogated, he urinated himself during the session, an intelligence corps captain later told investigators. "It's probably due to the fact that he was 5'0", and I'm 6'8", and I was yelling at him." A British Special Forces officer was so alarmed by the way the detainees were being treated, he raised concerns with an Australian intelligence officer and a member of the SAS. He refused to participate in the interrogations. "My refusal was based on the conduct of the guard force, who did not appear to be well trained," he later told investigators. He also removed his men from the exploitation process. Watch the detainees tell their stories for the first time tonight at